Malik Whitaker was 42 years old, and he had spent his entire adult life believing one thing: that a marriage, like a building, only stood as long as the people inside it kept showing up to repair the cracks. He had been showing up for 12 years. And then one night, a Tuesday, 10:47 p.m., 28th floor of a glass office building on Westheimer Road in downtown Houston, he sat alone at his desk with a black ballpoint pen in his hand and 23 pages of divorce papers spread out in front of him. He was ready to sign. What stopped him was a 9-word text from the woman he was about to leave. "Don't forget dinner at Keisha's tomorrow at 7:30. Come home early so we can go together." 9 words, no "love you," not even a period at the end. Just that flat, functional sentence floating on his screen like a sticky note left by a roommate. Malik set the pen down. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The kind of staring a man does when he is looking inward, through 12 years of memory, trying to find the exact moment everything went quiet between them. He could not find it. That was the trouble. No explosion, no confrontation he could point to and say, "There, that is where we broke." It had been slower than that, quieter. The way a house settles into its foundation over years, without anyone noticing until one morning a door simply will not close right anymore. His office was dark, except for the desk lamp and the Houston skyline burning orange beyond the windows. A car horn sounded briefly on the street below and went silent. The divorce papers rustled when he exhaled. Malik was a construction project manager, gifted enough that other engineers called him when something could not be solved on paper. He understood load-bearing capacity. He understood the difference between a crack that could be patched and a fracture that would bring the whole structure down. He had been trying to figure out which one his marriage was for 3 years. Imani. Her name still felt warm inside his chest, even now, even here, surrounded by 23 pages asking him to reduce 12 years to a signature. He remembered who she used to be. The woman who laughed loud enough to fill a parking garage, who danced in the kitchen on Sunday mornings while the grits were boiling, who once drove 4 hours to Beaumont in a thunderstorm just to fix his mother's porch swing. Sunlight in human form. Somewhere in the last 4 years, that light had dimmed. Now they lived in the same house on Braeswood Boulevard, like two people sharing a waiting room. Polite, careful. The kind of careful that was worse than arguing, because at least arguing meant you still believed something could change. Malik picked the pen back up. He held it over the first signature line. His hand did not move. "Do I have one more night left in me before I walk away for good?" What he could not have known was that within the next 24 hours, he would overhear a private conversation between his wife and her best friend, never meant for his ears. So raw and so completely at odds with everything he believed about their marriage that he would pull his truck over on I-610 in pouring rain and weep for the first time in over a decade. Not because he hated his wife, because he finally understood how long both of them had been drowning in silence, side by side, in the same house, too proud to reach for the other person's hand. Malik slid the papers back into the manila envelope and tucked it in the bottom drawer. He turned off the lamp and walked to the elevator. Outside, the October night was warm and heavy. He stood at the curb on Westheimer waiting for his truck, looking up at the orange glow of the city against the low clouds. "Come home early so we can go together." Together. He had not thought about that word in a long time. Maybe that was the problem. Whatever Malik overheard through that slightly open door the following evening did not just change his mind about the divorce. It broke him completely open. And what he found inside that break was something neither of them expected. Keep listening, because what Malik heard through that door the next night is the kind of thing that changes a person forever. The next evening, Malik came home early the way Imani had asked. She was in the bedroom, standing in front of the mirror, back to the door. The blue wrap dress, the one he used to say made her look like the most beautiful woman in every room she entered. He hadn't said that in years. She glanced at him in the mirror. "You're home," she said. Not, "I'm glad," just that flat acknowledgement. The kind you use for a package that arrived on time. "You asked me to," he said. They drove to Keisha Reynolds' penthouse in River Oaks in near complete silence. The radio played softly. Neither of them was listening. Malik kept his hands easy on the wheel. Imani kept hers folded in her lap. 12 years of marriage, and they had run out of things to say before the first exit ramp. Keisha's penthouse on West Alabama Street was exactly what you'd expect from a woman who used the word curated to describe her throw pillows. High ceilings, low golden lighting, waiters moving through the crowd with champagne on silver trays. About 40 guests, architects, developers, marketing executives talking about Caribbean vacations the way other people talk about weekend grocery runs. Malik shook hands, made conversation, smiled at the right moments, and watched Imani the whole time. She smiled when people spoke to her, but the smiles never reached her eyes. She held her champagne glass without drinking. Her laugh, when it came, was exactly right in pitch and timing, and completely hollow. Malik had spent 12 years studying structures. He knew the difference between a wall that was solid and one that had only been painted to look that way. Something inside his wife was cracking. He excused himself after about an hour and moved through the hallway toward the back of the penthouse. Then he heard it. The office door was open about 2 inches. His wife was crying. Malik stopped, one hand flat against the wall, heart doing something irregular in his chest. "I swear to God, Keisha," Imani's voice came through the gap, ragged and wet. "Malik is the only man who has ever made me feel truly safe. But I pushed him away because of my own pride. My stupid, stupid pride. My wife. Crying alone in a back room at a party, because she was too proud to cry in front of him." She kept going. Through that 2-inch gap, he listened to things she had never once said to his face in 12 years. She talked about the night her father died, 3 years ago, a Thursday in August. Malik had driven straight from the job site in Pearland, concrete dust on his arms, steel-toe boots still on his feet. He sat beside her and stayed for 4 straight hours. No speeches, no hollow reassurances, just presence. "That was the moment I knew he was my home," she whispered. "But I never said it, because I didn't want him to know how much I needed him. And the longer I stayed quiet, the harder it became to say anything at all." Then she said a name that sent a cold current through him. Deshaun Carter, his old college friend, the man who had written the check that kept Malik's engineering company alive during its worst quarter back in 2015. Imani admitted Deshaun had been calling and texting her for months, showing up near her office on Greenway Plaza, telling her she deserved more, a bigger life, more excitement, that Malik was holding her back. "Some days I almost believed it," she whispered, "because I was so empty, and he was standing right there, handing me a reason." Malik walked back through the party without saying goodbye to anyone. He drove, no destination, just movement, down Westheimer, up onto the 610 loop. Somewhere near Shepherd Drive, he pulled onto the shoulder in the pouring rain and put the truck in park. For the first time in more than a decade, Malik put his face in his hands and wept. Not from anger. He wept because he suddenly saw the full picture. 2 people who loved each other enormously and silently and painfully, drowning in the same water, in the same house, while both kept treading and neither would reach out first. "How quiet have I become," he thought, "for her to carry all of this alone." When he came home near midnight, the house was dark except for the small lamp in the upstairs hallway. He walked upstairs and knocked softly on the guest bedroom door, the room where Imani had been sleeping alone for 8 months. She opened it slowly, hair loose, eyes already red. He thought about the woman crying through that 2-inch gap. My wife. The one who kept everything inside because she did not want to appear weak. I heard everything, he said quietly. The color left her face. They talked until nearly 2 in the morning, sitting on the floor with their backs against the bed and a box of tissues between them. At some point, Imani retrieved an old shoebox from the closet. Every handwritten love letter Malik had given her during their 3rd year together, worn soft at the folds from years of being opened and refolded. And underneath, his old gray Texas A&M t-shirt, the one he'd searched the whole house for and finally assumed was gone. She had kept every bit of it. Then came a confession that made the room go still. Deshawn had invited her on a weekend trip 4 months ago. She had driven to the airport, sat alone in the departures lot for 30 minutes, then drove home. "Why?" Malik asked. She looked at him. "Because I got there and I thought about you, about who you are, and I couldn't do it." The silence between them after that was different. Not cold, not careful, something closer to honest. What Malik and Imani said in that first therapy session the following week nearly broke them both, and revealed a sacrifice so enormous it left the room completely speechless. She drove to that airport, sat there for 30 minutes, then drove home. One word. Did she earn a second chance? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments. Dr. Lena Harper had been a marriage therapist for over 25 years, and in that time, she had developed one quiet, unfailing observation about couples in crisis. The most dangerous marriages were rarely the ones full of conflict. They were the ones full of silence. The ones where 2 people had decided, separately and without discussion, that protecting their partner from the truth was the same as protecting the marriage. Where love had quietly hardened into distance, and neither person understood how it had happened, because neither person had intended for it to happen at all. She had seen it more times than she could count. Sitting across from Malik and Imani Whitaker in her 4th-floor office on Westheimer Road near Kirby Drive, watching them arrange themselves in the 2 low chairs with careful, controlled posture and the specific politeness that long-married couples use when they are deeply afraid of each other. She recognized it immediately. 2 people who love each other, she thought, who have been living as strangers in the same house and calling it keeping the peace. She had a clinical name for what she observed in both of them: emotional avoidance rooted in attachment anxiety. The fear that expressing need will be read as weakness, that vulnerability will create burden, that the person who loves you might love you less if they truly see how much you need them. It is one of the most common and most quietly destructive patterns in long-term marriages, and it works in the dark, feeding on silence, invisible until the damage is already deep. She asked Imani to begin. Imani looked at Malik for a long moment before she spoke. Then she told him about the hotel. It had happened about 5 months earlier, a downtown Houston hotel near Discovery Green. Deshawn had framed it as dinner between old acquaintances. She had told herself the same thing, wanting to believe it enough that she had not asked herself hard questions on the drive over. It was not just dinner. Afterward, in the elevator, he kissed her without asking. His hands moved and his voice stayed low and certain, filling the space with promises. The life she deserved, the woman she could still become. For one moment, she had almost let it happen. Then something broke loose inside her. She pushed him back with both hands. She walked out of that hotel so quickly she left her purse in the lobby. She pulled over twice on Allen Parkway on the way home because her hands were shaking too badly to drive steadily. When she got home, she was physically sick over the bathroom sink because the revulsion she felt with him and with herself and with how close she had come, lived in her body like something that needed to come out. She had told no one. She had been carrying it alone for 5 months. By the time she finished speaking, she was crying so hard her shoulders shook, and the small sound machine outside Dr. Harper's door was doing nothing at all. From the outside, from the perspective of someone who studies human behavior, what Deshaun Carter had been doing to Imani was not impulsive. It was deliberate. Therapists and researchers call it targeted emotional exploitation. He had identified the precise fracture in Imani's life, her grief, her exhaustion, the growing silence in her marriage, and had positioned himself there. Not loudly, not obviously, but as a listener, a presence. Someone who seemed to understand her in ways she felt her husband no longer did. He had used her legitimate need, the need to feel seen and valued, as a door. This pattern appears consistently in research on marital vulnerability. Affairs rarely begin with physical attraction alone. They most often begin with emotional validation offered at the exact moment a person is most starved for it. Deshaun did not force his way into Imani's marriage. He moved quietly through a door that loneliness and silence had already left unlocked. That is not a defense of Imani's choices. It is simply the truth of how this kind of damage works. And it is the clearest possible argument for why silence in a marriage is never, ever a safe place to live. Across the coffee table, Malik sat with both hands gripping the chair arms, jaw tight, eyes fixed at a point beyond his wife's shoulder. Dr. Harper watched him carefully. She had worked with hundreds of men in his position, and she understood what was happening beneath that stillness. He was doing something that looked like calm, but was anything but. He was choosing, deliberately, at great personal cost, to stay present rather than react, to listen rather than defend, to absorb rather than explode. Behavioral scientists call this affect regulation under relational threat. It is invisible from the outside precisely because it looks like doing nothing. In fact, it is one of the hardest things a person can do. Receive devastating news about someone you love, inside a relationship you are fighting to save, and refuse to let your pain become a weapon. When Malik finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "There's something I never told you either." Imani looked up. 3 months earlier, Malik had been offered a promotion to Regional Director of Southeast Operations, a position that would have increased his salary by nearly 50% and fundamentally changed the trajectory of his career. The role required 6 months of travel per year. His supervisor had called it a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Malik had turned it down. He had felt, the way an engineer feels an unstable structure shifting under load, that their marriage could not absorb another sustained absence. So he declined, said nothing about it at home, and went on building quietly.
"You gave that up for me?"
Imani's voice was barely audible. "For us," Malik said. "And I didn't say anything because I didn't want you carrying guilt on top of everything else you were already carrying." The room held that for a moment. Dr. Harper set her notepad down gently. "Do either of you see the pattern?" she asked. They both looked at her. "You each made an enormous sacrifice for the other," she said, "out of love. And you each kept it hidden, also out of love." She paused. "But the hiding felt, to the other person, like distance, like coldness, like not being needed. The very thing you were each trying to prevent, losing each other, was accelerated by the silence you believed was protecting you." Researchers call this invisible sacrifice syndrome, the accumulated weight of love expressed through actions that are never witnessed, breeding a quiet resentment that neither partner can fully explain because neither partner understands what the other has been carrying. Both Malik and Imani recognized it in the way people recognize something they have been living inside for years without ever having a name for it. Then Malik's phone buzzed. His younger brother Jamal, calling from Atlanta. Malik declined it twice. The third time, Dr. Harper suggested he answer. He put it on speaker. "Are y'all still in there?" Jamal's voice filled the quiet office immediately, too loud, too sure of itself. "Malik, listen to me. Sign the papers. She does not deserve you. She has been taking you for granted for years, and you know it." "Jamal!" Malik's voice went sharp. "You deserve somebody who actually, you don't know anything about my wife." Silence on the line. Then, for the first time, a crack appeared in Malik's composure. Just a thread of it, just enough to be visible. "You don't know what she's been carrying," he said. "And you don't know what I almost walked away from." He ended the call. Imani had both hands pressed over her mouth. The room held the moment. Then Imani's phone lit up on the arm of her chair. A text from Deshawn. 48 hours and I leave for Europe. This is the last time I reach out. You know where to find me." All three of them read it at once. The silence that followed had weight and temperature. This too had a name in the behavioral literature: artificial scarcity as emotional leverage. Last chance, 48 hours, last time. It was engineered pressure, designed to trigger panic, to bypass reflection, to make Imani feel that a door was closing, and she had to move before rational thought caught up with her. It was the same mechanism used by anyone who understands that a frightened person makes very different decisions than a calm one. Imani picked up her phone. She looked at the message for 3 seconds. Then she dropped it onto Dr. Harper's hardwood floor, hard enough to crack the screen straight across. She turned toward her husband. "I choose you, Malik." Her voice was not fragile. It was clear, certain. The voice of a woman who had found her way back to herself. "I have been choosing you for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it out loud."
He looked at her. After everything, the hotel, the hidden promotion, the airport parking lot, the years of silence layered on silence, he looked at his wife and felt something shift inside his chest. The way a structure settles when the load it was carrying is finally, properly distributed. When someone tells you that you deserve more, look carefully at what they are actually offering. Real love does not arrive wearing urgency or deadlines. Real love sits beside you in the dark and waits. The most important thing you can do for a marriage is say the hard, true thing out loud, before silence turns your sacrifice into a wound neither of you can see.
What happened at the Houston corporate gala, in front of 200 people, with Deshawn watching, was the most powerful public moment of their marriage. But the hardest night was still ahead. Stay right here, because what Imani said in front of that entire ballroom left every conversation in the room dead silent. There is a psychological pattern that most people never encounter until they have lived through it themselves. Researchers call it the post-breakthrough collapse. It works like this. A couple reaches a genuine emotional turning point, a moment of real honesty, real connection, real choice. The ground feels solid beneath them for the first time in years. They exhale. They believe, with something close to certainty, that the worst is behind them. And then, sometimes within hours, sometimes within days, something falls apart. Not because the breakthrough was false, but because it opened a door. And behind that door was everything that had been carefully managed for months. Old wounds, unspoken fears, grief that never found language, resentments that had been sitting in the dark long before this particular crisis began. The breakthrough does not heal the pain. It releases it. And if a couple does not understand this, if they mistake the collapse that follows for evidence that the repair was an illusion, they will often make the worst decisions of their marriage in the hours immediately following their most honest moment. This is exactly what happened to Malik and Imani Whitaker. The Houston Construction and Real Estate Corporate Gala was held at the Marriott Marquis on Dallas Street. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, 200 people in their finest clothes and their most polished versions of themselves. Malik wore a black tuxedo. Imani wore a deep burgundy gown, her curly hair pinned up with two loose pieces framing her face. They arrived together. They had driven over in a silence that felt different from all the ones before it. Less like a wall, more like two people still learning how to stand near each other without needing armor. The therapy sessions with Dr. Harper were working, slowly, unevenly, the way genuine repair always goes. Malik was midway through a conversation about a commercial project near the Heights when he spotted Deshaun across the room. He recognized him immediately. The unhurried posture, the tailored suit, the practiced ease of a man who had never once doubted his welcome anywhere. Deshaun greeted people by name, touched elbows, accepted congratulations on a recent deal. He cast a brief, civil nod in Malik's direction. Then he moved with slow, deliberate purpose toward Imani. He leaned close and kept his voice low. "You deserve a better life than this." The conversations nearest to them slowed without anyone quite deciding to stop. Imani looked down at the table. Then she stood up. She turned to face him, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet. But it carried with the particular clarity of a woman who had made up her mind completely and felt no need to perform it. "I already have a man who has spent his whole life building one for me." No one in the immediate vicinity moved. "You don't build, Deshaun. You arrive when something is almost finished and offer to buy it. That is not the same thing." A pause, just long enough. "I don't need an upgrade. I need to deserve the man I already have." The room held that silence for a long beat. Deshaun's expression moved through several things: surprise, recalculation, a flash of something that might have been genuine embarrassment, before settling into a tight, controlled blankness. He picked up his glass from the table beside him, straightened his jacket with one small, precise gesture, and walked away through the gathered quiet of 200 people without another word. Malik stood 12 feet away with his hands at his sides. He crossed the room and took her hand. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Now here is what was happening beneath the surface of that moment. What Imani did was not simply brave. Behaviorally, it was a specific and significant act, what researchers call public recommitment as identity consolidation. When a person who has been pulled between two competing versions of their life makes a public declaration of choice, something shifts internally. The act of saying, "I choose this," in front of witnesses does not only communicate a decision to others, it communicates it to the self. It closes a door, not just for the person being turned away, but for the part of the speaker that had not yet fully closed it. Imani's words were not only for Deshaun. They were for the version of herself that had once driven to an airport and needed 30 minutes alone in a parking lot to turn around. That version of herself needed to hear the choice spoken out loud, in public, with her husband watching. She was no longer standing in the hallway. She had stepped all the way back inside and closed the door behind her. But understanding the post-breakthrough collapse requires acknowledging something uncomfortable. A single declaration cannot do the work that years of silence created. That night, after the gala, they came home to the house on Braeswood Boulevard, and the door was barely closed before the pressure broke. The emotional release that the therapy and the ballroom moment had together triggered, all of those months of processed and unprocessed pain, had been building quietly beneath the surface all evening. And now, in their own kitchen, with no audience and no occasion to manage themselves for, it came flooding out. It started with something small. It always does. A comment about work hours. A response about a financial decision. And then, As it does when the real wound has never been fully named, it stopped being about any of that. Old pain came out wearing new words. Old fears arrived dressed as accusations. 12 years of silence, swallowed needs, and hidden sacrifice poured into one conversation that grew louder and more desperate by the minute until it became the worst argument of their entire marriage. Behavioral researchers call this emotional flooding, the point at which the body's stress response becomes so overwhelming that the parts of the brain responsible for empathy, nuance, and long-term thinking effectively go offline. What remains is raw reaction, defensive, frightened, and capable of saying things that cannot be recalled once they are out. Both Malik and Imani reached that threshold at the same time. And at some point, standing in their kitchen with his voice ragged and his hands shaking, Malik said the words that fell between them like shattered glass. Maybe I should just sign those papers after all. Imani sat down on the kitchen floor. She did not shout back. She did not argue. She simply sat down and cried. The helpless, total kind of grief that comes when a person has run entirely out of the strength to hold themselves together. Malik grabbed his keys and walked out. He drove through Houston at nearly 3 in the morning, the streets empty and rain-slicked and glittering. He did not plan where to go. He found himself pulling off Alameda Road and through the gate of one of his unfinished South Houston construction sites. He walked out among the steel beams and concrete forms in the dark, while rain fell around him. He reached into the back seat. The manila envelope had been sitting there for weeks. He carried it under the overhang of a half-finished wall, held his lighter to the corner, and watched the pages catch. He held the burning envelope until the heat made it impossible, then set what remained on the bare concrete and watched it collapse into ash while the rain hissed against the edges. He sat on the concrete floor and stayed there a long time. Dr. Harper would later describe what Malik did that night as a commitment device, a deliberate action that removes a future temptation by making it unavailable. By destroying the exit, he was not pretending he had no doubts. He was protecting his future self from acting on those doubts in a moment of weakness. He was deciding, before he was fully capable of rational thought, that he would stay inside the problem until it was solved. I am choosing to remain, the burning papers said. Even now, even tonight. He sat between the concrete and the steel for a long time, wondering if he still had the strength left to rebuild something that had broken this many times. He did not yet know that the answer was already waiting for him at home, and that it would arrive in a form he had never imagined. Lesson for the audience. Even after a genuine breakthrough, even after a public declaration of love, even after real progress, one devastating argument can make everything feel hopeless again. That is not the marriage dying. That is the marriage going through its hardest part. The people who mistake that darkness for the end will walk away from the very thing they spent years building. The people who stay inside it, who burn the exit if they have to, are the ones who find out what is waiting on the other side. What Imani placed on the kitchen table when Malik finally came home that night, you will not see coming. And you will not forget it. Stay right here, because the moment Malik saw what was waiting for him on that kitchen table is the moment this whole story finally makes sense. The call came 2 nights later. Malik was alone at the South Houston construction site, reviewing blueprints under the fluorescent light of the site trailer, his coffee going cold beside his left hand. The city outside was quiet. The rain had cleared and left the air scrubbed clean and heavy with the smell of wet concrete. His phone rang just after 11. Deshawn. Malik stared at the name on the screen for a long time before he answered. I won't take much of your time, Deshawn said. His voice was different from the gala, flatter. The performance quality was gone, and what remained underneath was harder and cooler than Malik had expected. You remember the $80,000 I loaned you when you were getting the company started, back in 2015? Malik set his pencil down. I remember, he said. You paid it back, I know that, with interest. Fair is fair. A pause, measured and deliberate. But favors have a longer life than money, Malik. You know that as well as I do. The way I see it, the fair thing is you step back. Let Imani make her own choices without you standing in the doorway. The line was quiet. Then Deshawn added, almost gently, she was almost ready. You know that, right? She was closer than you think. Malik said nothing. Deshawn hung up. Malik sat in the sight trailer for a long time without moving. He thought about 20 years of friendship, pickup basketball on the courts at the University of Houston, long nights studying for engineering boards, the afternoon in 2015 when Deshawn had handed him a check across a table without requiring paperwork because he said he trusted Malik's word. He had carried gratitude for that for years. Real gratitude, the kind that goes deep. And now he understood that Deshawn had been carrying that same transaction differently. Not as something shared, not as the memory of a friendship, but as a debt to be collected when the timing was right. An emotional lien on Malik's marriage, held quietly for years, waiting for the moment it could be cashed in. He had spent his career understanding the load-bearing capacity of things: concrete, steel, cable tension. The principle was always the same. There is a threshold between the weight a structure can carry and the weight that will bring it down. The most dangerous loads were the invisible ones, the ones that accumulated slowly, disguised as something stable, until the day they were not. Deshawn had been that kind of weight. Malik turned off the trailer light, locked the door, and drove home through the quiet streets. The kitchen lamp above the stove was still on when he came through the side door. Imani was sitting at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had not touched. She had been crying, recently, and for a long time from the look of her. Her hair was loose. She was wearing his old gray t-shirt, the one from the shoebox. She looked up when he came in. He sat down across from her without taking off his jacket. He told her about Deshawn's call. All of it. The debt reframed as leverage, the implication that she had almost chosen to leave, the cold patience behind the whole thing. He said it plainly, without anger, the way a builder describes structural damage, factually, because that is the only honest starting point for repair. Imani set her mug down on the table.
I've known for a long time that Deshawn was not my friend,
she said.
I knew it before any of this, but I let him stay close because I was lonely inside my own marriage, and I didn't know how to name that without it sounding like a betrayal of you.
She paused.
That is on me, and I'm done pretending it isn't.
Malik looked at her.
And I let the silence grow,
he said.
I thought keeping the promotion to myself was protecting you. I thought carrying things alone was the same as being strong.
He shook his head slowly.
It wasn't.
The kitchen was quiet. Rain had started again, ticking softly against the window above the sink. I was afraid, Imani said, that if I told you how much I needed you, you'd think less of me, that I'd become a burden. And I was afraid, Malik said, that if I admitted how much I needed you, I'd become one. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Two people who had been carrying the same fear in separate pockets for 12 years. Slowly, quietly, suffocating the marriage they both loved, because neither one had been willing to say the simplest and most necessary thing. I need you. I am not whole without you. I am afraid to say so. The silence between them now was different from every silence that had come before it. It did not carry the weight of things left unsaid. It was just two people sitting still, in the same room, finally, in the same story. Imani stood and walked to the hallway closet. Malik heard the shelf, the soft rustling. She returned carrying the Nike shoebox and set it on the table between them. And beside it, she placed something else. A small white object. A pregnancy test. Positive. Malik's hands moved to his face. "I'm pregnant," Imani said. Her voice was steady, not triumphant, not fearful, just honest. The most honest thing either of them had offered in years. "And I want our child born inside a home that both her parents built together, not one they walked away from." Malik sat with his face in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, and his expression was something between tears and the particular quality of relief that comes when a person realizes they stopped at exactly the right moment. When they understand, with the whole body, how close they came to losing the thing they needed most. "Then we build it," he said. They did exactly that. In the months that followed, they sold the Braeswood property and purchased a lot in the Meyerland neighborhood in southwest Houston, on a quiet street near the bayou, where old live oak trees arched over the sidewalk. Malik drew the plans himself. Imani chose everything from the foundation color to the shape of the porch railing. They disagreed about the kitchen layout, the bathroom tile, the guest room window placement, and they talked through every single disagreement instead of filing it away. Every decision became a conversation they had never had before. Every room was built honest. And somewhere in the process of building the house, they rebuilt the marriage, not back to what it had been, which had been quietly broken in ways neither of them had ever fully understood, but forward to something better. Something tested. Something that had been under load and had not collapsed. Real love is not the absence of damage. It is the willingness to sit across from each other in a quiet kitchen at midnight and say the true thing at last. Never allow old debts or old silences to become the weapon that destroys your present. What you build in honesty will always outlast what you nearly lost in pride. What Malik and Imani found standing together on the rooftop of the home they built with their own hands, 1 year later, with their daughter in Malik's arms and the Houston skyline below, is the moment this whole story has been building toward. Stay just a little longer, because the ending of this story is something worth carrying with you long after it's over. 1 year later, the house on Linkwood Drive in Meyerland was finished on a Thursday in late September, and it was exactly what they had planned, and nothing at all like what either of them had expected, which is the way the best things usually turn out. The live oak trees in the front yard were older than the neighborhood. Their roots had lifted the sidewalk in 2 places, and when Malik poured the new walkway, he curved it around them rather than cutting them back. Some things that had been growing that long, he said, deserved to be worked around instead of removed. Imani had laughed when he explained his reasoning, a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that came from somewhere genuine rather than somewhere performed. They had been hearing that laugh more often lately. The front porch had 2 rocking chairs on it. Imani had found them at an estate sale on Bel Air Boulevard. Heavy wood, slightly uneven. The kind that had been sitting on somebody's porch since long before either of them was born. They creaked when you sat in them. Malik said he would fix the creak. Imani told him to leave it alone. "It sounds like someone lived in it," she said. He left it. The night they brought their daughter home from Memorial Hermann Hospital, Malik sat in one of those rocking chairs for 45 minutes before he came inside. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the bayou nearby and the distant murmur of traffic drifting in from Loop 610. A neighbor 2 doors down, a woman named Diane Washington, who had introduced herself the week they moved in while holding a casserole dish and wearing an apron that said, "Blessed and highly seasoned," had left a foil-covered pan on their front step with a note. "Congratulations from the Washingtons. Come over whenever you're ready." Imani watched Malik through the screen door for a while. The broad-shouldered man in the rocking chair, holding his daughter in both arms like something he intended never to set down, looking out at the dark street with an expression she had not seen on his face in years. She pushed the screen door open and stepped out. She leaned against the porch railing and looked at him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked up. "That I almost didn't make it here," he said simply. She pulled the other rocking chair close and sat down beside him. And they stayed on that porch together while the baby slept, and the chairs creaked their slow, uneven rhythm. And neither of them felt any need to fill the quiet. This silence was not like the ones that had nearly ended them. This one did not carry the weight of things withheld or pain unspoken. This was just two people sitting still inside a life they had chosen. Not once in a grand gesture, but every day, in the small, repeated decision to speak rather than swallow, to ask rather than assume, to knock on a closed door rather than walk past it. They kept seeing Dr. Harper for another 8 months after the baby arrived. Not because the marriage was in crisis, it was not, but because both of them had learned, at considerable cost, what happened when two people decided they no longer needed to maintain what they had built together. They went once a month and spoke honestly, and some sessions left them tender and some left them uncomfortable. And once, Imani cried the entire drive home while Malik held her hand across the center console. All of it was better than silence. Imani returned to her marketing consulting work when the baby was 4 months old, on a schedule she had redesigned to give herself room to breathe. She became more careful about which clients she accepted. She began saying no to things that cost her more than they gave back, a skill she had never quite believed she was allowed to practice before. She told Malik once that the most instructive thing Deshaun Carter had accidentally done for her was show her exactly what it looked like when someone treated her ambition as something to be exploited rather than something to be respected. "I understand my own worth differently now," she said. Malik told her he had understood it all along. She rolled her eyes at him the way she used to, the warm, affectionate eye roll of a woman who loves a man enough to tease him about being right. And for Malik, that small, ordinary gesture was perhaps the most beautiful moment of the entire year. Jamal came to Houston for Christmas and held his niece for 3 hours without once putting her down, which told you everything you needed to know about who that child already was. He apologized to Imani directly, standing in the kitchen on Christmas afternoon, while sweet potato pie cooled on the counter and Nat King Cole played from the small Bluetooth speaker on the shelf. He kept it simple, and he meant it. Imani accepted the apology with a grace that Jamal later told people he was still thinking about. Some evenings, when the baby was sleeping and the house was quiet, Malik and Imani sat on the back porch and looked out at the small yard they had planted together, raised vegetable beds along the fence where Imani was attempting tomatoes with wildly uneven results, and a young fig tree in the corner that would not produce fruit for years yet. She had planted it anyway because she liked the idea of tending something that required patience, something you had to believe in before it gave you anything back. Malik had not said anything when she planted it. He had just gone inside and gotten her a glass of water. On one of those quiet evenings, Imani said, "I keep thinking about all the time we lost." Malik rocked slowly in his chair. "I think about what we built with it instead," he said. Final message to the audience. This story reminds us that the most damaging words in a long marriage are often not the cruel ones. They are the true ones that were never said at all. Malik loved his wife enough to give up a career-defining promotion. Imani loved her husband enough to turn a car around in an airport parking lot. Neither one said a word, and that silence nearly cost them everything. Here's what this story is actually asking you to do. Tonight, after dinner, before the Hallmark movie comes on and the evening slips away, pull out a notepad. Not your phone, a real notepad, the kind from the Walgreens checkout aisle. Write down one thing your husband did for you that you never properly thanked him for. One sacrifice you saw but never named out loud. If he is still with you, read it to him before bed. If he is no longer here, read it aloud anyway. To the room, to the photograph on the dresser, to yourself. Grief does not disqualify gratitude. It deepens it. And if your son or grandson is in a marriage that has gone quiet, share this story with him. Not with a lecture attached. Just share it and let it do the work. The couples who survive are not the ones who never crack. They are the ones who learn, before it is too late, that needing each other is not a weakness. It is the whole foundation, written by a human. AI is merely a companion. This story was born to spread hope. Kindness doesn't need to be grand, only sincere. And life will always find a way to repay those who dare to be kind amid countless injustices. Production team story and screenplay by Quinn Fung, lead screenwriter. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Wynn. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Wynn. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.